Stephen Jahncke. Most of you know Steve. He has taught classes here. He's a Reiki master. He's here just about every Sunday sharing in one way or another. And Steve, we would just like to know a little bit about your early years, if you would. Tell us where you were born, and some of the people in the audience already know about your family's business in the shipping industry.
Well, when I was born in December 1941, my family was already well recognized in business, civic, and social circles in New Orleans. You might say that I'm the kid that grew up with the proverbial silver spoon in his mouth. But I was the oldest of four. I have three younger sisters. Unfortunately, the middle one, Karen, passed away a couple of years ago during the pandemic. We lived in New Orleans, primarily in Metairie, Louisiana. All four of us went to private schools, and I would say that I was telling Judy earlier that there was a program on PBS a number of years ago called Manor House, and it was about living in a manor house in Great Britain around 1900. Back in the days when people who lived that lifestyle had 30 to 40 live-in servants. And I connected with the servants because I was raised to do what I was told, to be obedient, and my parents expected me to do that even after I got married. I was told who to marry, when to marry, but still be obedient to my parents. I did not know that I had a choice. And, by the time I was an adolescent, I can remember coming home from school, and we had dinner family style. We had a cook that stayed to serve dinner, and I had to wear a shirt with a collar, and my sisters could not come to the table with their hair in rollers. But I can remember expressing my frustration, and my father saying, "No, you can't feel that, you can't think that way." And I learned rather quickly to shut down my feelings. And even today, something will happen, and it may take me 3 or 4 days to process and realize what I'm feeling because of. Now, I've gotten better. It used to take weeks, but I've gotten better, at doing it. By the time I was 13, the oldest of my three sisters could do no wrong, and I could do no right. And I had been taught that you never, ever, under any circumstances, hit a girl. And I can't tell you how many mornings I went to school with 3 streaks of blood down each arm where I had been clawed by my sister, and I could not retaliate. Early on, I'm guessing probably 3rd, 4th grade, I came across my father's yearbooks from when he was in boarding school back in the early 30s. And I always asked my dad, "Can I go?" And was always told, "No, it's impossible. It's too expensive. Put it out of your mind." So the spring after I turned 14, my father invited me to join him for lunch Now, this was unheard of because for us to miss school, you had to be on your deathbed and the doctor called. But, this particular day, my mother had to drive me down to his office, and over lunch, my dad asked me if I wanted to go to Woodbury Forest School up in Orange, Virginia. I didn't even hesitate. I said yes. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I knew I was getting out of an untenable situation at home. And Woodbury Forest gave me the structure that I needed. I was not a great student, I was an average student, but it allowed me to participate in sports and in extracurricular activities that I knew I wouldn't have the opportunity if I stayed at home. Now, at Woodbury, we had to go to church on Sunday, and we had chapel twice a week, and it was basically all the Episcopal service, which is what I grew up with. But to say that I had a real understanding of what it was all about, I didn't. I'm married in June of 1966 in the Presbyterian Church, and we started attending church there, and in quick succession I had 2 daughters, and in 1973 we moved to Covington. My grandfather had a summer home in Covington, and as a kid growing up in the late 40s and the 1950s, it was a magical place. 35 acres of gardens between 2 rivers, in-ground swimming pool that was fed by an artesian well that maintained an 85-degree temperature year-round, fresh water flowing through it 24 hours a day, tennis court, badminton court, basketball court, numerous skiffs, canoes, and an 26-foot inboard motor launch that I could operate when I was 12 years old. So I was Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, and Jim all rolled into one. I loved it. So in 1973, we moved to Covington, and finally in 1980, the family divided up the property, and I ended up with my grandfather's home, all 7,000 square feet of it that you couldn't heat in the winter or cool in the summer. And I thought it would be wonderful. Now, I had my mother and father next door. I had 2 cousins right around the road. I had a sister in between. And if you sneezed in one house, you heard it in all the rest. And I quickly learned that it was not what I imagined it would be. It was an absolute nightmare. And when my wife and I made the decision to sell, the you-know-what hit the fan from the rest of the family. And, that was that.
Well, I know that you had a lot of things that occurred in your life since then. And I wanted to ask, what brought you to Unity teachings and learning to be a Reiki master, having come from a profession where spirit certainly wasn't involved in any way?
My wife asked me to leave. I think it was February of 2013, and very quickly I found out that she had done a good job of poisoning the waters in St. Tammany Parish, and I figured I would move over here because I already knew David Wilson through the Mankind Project and was seeing David professionally because he is a counselor, and he was the one who introduced me to Unity and to Reiki. So that's how I got here.
Okay.
I had already been exposed to shall we say, metaphysical teaching. In 2006, a friend of mine lent me his copy of the movie, What the Bleep Do We Know? And that was my first exposure to quantum physics. And I was absolutely fascinated. And very shortly, I want to say that was like in February of 2006, and shortly after that, here comes Rhonda Byrne's The Secret, here comes Joe Vitale, here comes Jack Canfield, here comes Abraham Hicks, and I wasn't looking for any of this stuff. It was falling in my lap. And really through Abraham Hicks primarily. And I've listened to their audio books multiple times, and I learn something new each time I hear them. But my perception of the world changed. And I've come to realize that the universe we live in is bigger, more magnificent, more incredible than we can possibly even imagine. And I realized that at that point, I had to start making decisions for myself. You know, what did I believe? Me personally, not everybody else. And you know, I sat down and figured out that for me, we live in an attraction-based universe. Vibrational, everything is vibration, energy, it's all in motion. We may not perceive it. It's multidimensional, and it has infinite possibilities. And according to Abraham, we live on a planet of incredible contrast and diversity that is big enough to accommodate all of the variety of interests, beliefs, and desires. We're supposed to be different. You know, that's what makes the world go round. I can't imagine how horrible it'd be if we were all the same. And the reality is, I'm not going to like everyone who comes down the pike, but I need to respect them, just like I want them to respect me. Yeah, we're not supposed to be buddy-buddy with everybody, but we can respect them. Just recently, I came across Freddie Silva, and he's written a number of books. His latest book is the First Templar Nation, which just happens to be the nation where he was born, Portugal, but it's all about the Knights Templar. And I knew the typical history, but Freddie Silva spent 15 years researching these guys, and they were not what the conventional wisdom says they were. Their beliefs were based on the Gnostic Gospels that disappeared in 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea. And Freddie's life he's explored everything from the crop circles in the late 1980s, sacred places all around the world, and the Knights Templar, and then realizing that all of them are connected. And for me, it's been absolutely fascinating. In one of Freddie's documentaries on the Knights Templar, he starts off the program by saying, give yourself a present. Go buy the Oxford Dictionary of Etymology, which is the study of words, going back to the 1800s, and look up the definition of heretic. The original definition was someone who was possessed the facts and could make a choice. Now that fits right in with Abraham Hicks, with all of the other people that I've been reading. But it's funny how the church, and primarily the church, has changed the definition to something else. So right now I'm in the process of reading the Gnostic Gospels, which are fascinating, and learning the history, which to a large extent is not readily available. Yeah. And it's absolutely fascinating.
Well, Steve, let me ask you something. It sounds to me like, and I know from knowing you and all these years, that there's a lot to be forgiven of your parents, your family, your early upbringing, so many things of your own suppression of who you were. And as we said, if you don't know you have a choice, then you don't. But where or when were you finally able to forgive all that and move on with your life so that you could heal you?
There was no one event, but it really wasn't until shortly after Betsy asked me to leave, so the 2013, I was aware of a weekend workshop for guys with family of origin issues and abuse. And it was limited to only 6 men. And I was the oldest by far, and the youngest was 36. As I recall, 3 of us had sexual abuse issues. A couple had physical abuse issues, and all of us had emotional abuse issues. And it was during that workshop that I came to realize that my parents did the best they could do with the awareness, knowledge, and understanding they had at the time. Yeah. And I was able to let go of a lot of it. It still crops up, and I just have to, as soon as I'm aware that I'm in that negative loop, just stop it and let it go. It's in the past, and it's taken quite a while for me to shuck that 200-pound dead weight I've been carrying around for so long, because that's what it is. It's heavy and it smells. And I don't need to stay stuck in that space.
That's perfect, and I'm sure there are people here in the audience that need to hear that, need to hear how incredibly important it is to recognize, first of all, that you do have a choice, then to recognize that you need to forgive, or it's just going to be a noose around your own neck the rest of your life, right?
Right. But the other thing too, Judy, that I had to learn, my daughters, the first time you asked me to talk here and share my story, I did. And I didn't say anything to my daughters, but I sent them the link to the video. They were not happy campers. You know, they were very upset. And I learned a big lesson. Yes, it is important for me to share my story, but it's also to allow them to have a choice.
Yes.
To ask, do you want this? Abraham, in one of, I think their last book, The Vortex, makes the statement, without asking, there can be no answers. So that was my mistake. I learned about the Mankind Project in the spring of 2008. And I had been in a men's group for a couple of years in New Orleans, and by the time of Christmas 2007, I was keenly aware that I had completed the work that I was there to do, and it was time for me to move on. But I really needed the connection with other men in a safe environment, and I didn't know where I was going to find it. And I knew I wasn't going to find it in the traditional church. On the internet, I had come across the Mankind Project website. I had bookmarked it, but had never taken the time to read it, study it. And I did, and I sent an email to the national organization wanting more information. And within 30 minutes, I had a phone call from a guy in New Orleans. And as we talked, he said, well, we're having a New Warrior training weekend, the first weekend in May. Why don't you come join us? So I figured, you know, why not? Right. And, you know, growing up the way I did, I like to be in control. So I knew I was going to drive, and the weekend was going to take place right up the road at Lake Hillsdale. I'd call something else now, but it was a youth camp at one time. And there were two other guys in Mandeville who were going, and John Dambo from Lafayette. I had never met John before, but so the four of us, and it was really kind of funny. I normally am going to be, you know, if I've got an appointment for, say, 11:30, I'm going to be there well before. Well, that afternoon, they told us to be there between 5 and 6. And it was just before 6 that I get up there. And as we're checking in, and I'm walking toward the main building, a guy steps down the steps, and it was someone that I had seen at the New Orleans Men's Center several years before, hadn't seen him since, and he says, Steve, we've been waiting a long time for you. And, you know, I go through the check-in, well, they pushed every button that I had, and after about an hour, I end up sitting in a dark room with a single candle, sitting on the floor, wondering what in the hell have I gotten myself into? And I'm sitting there, and then suddenly realized all they were doing was pushing me out of my comfort zone. And as soon as I made that connection, I said, I'm here for the ride. And
Interesting.
it was great.
Good.
It was great.
Well, as usually happens on Sunday morning, it gets to be close to 11:30 before we even know it. But we've certainly enjoyed hearing part of your story, Steve. Look forward to hearing more. And if you'll be staying after, if people have a few more questions, I'm sure they'll look
I'm
you up.
available.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.